Good morning, everybody. I think we're going to go ahead and get started for our State Charter School Board meeting. Today is September 9th. We're a couple minutes late, but we did get everybody connected to the internet, so that was a fair trade-off. Welcome to our Assistant Attorney General, David Jones, who's joining us in person. Happy to see you. And thank you, long title, something, Deputy Superintendent Stallings for being here with us. And Board Member Hymas from the Utah State Board of Education. We're happy to have you with us. Thank you to our staff who has worked tirelessly to prepare everything for us for our meeting today, and to the USBE staff for getting us connected and helping us stream everything. And thank you, board members, for volunteering your time in helping us fulfill our vision and mission, advancing choice, innovation, and student success through rigorous authorizing and supportive oversight. Thank you all for being here today. It is nice to see your faces. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. If everyone can stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. At this point, I don't think we have any public comment. I actually don't see any public here, so we will move on to the board chair report. I don't have much to go over today. Welcome to the beginning of a new school year. It's really, I feel like I'm talking to nobody, so let me shift a little bit so I can see human faces. One of the things that I was just thinking about, and possibly you guys have been too, is the 20th anniversary of September 11th. And just remembering, I think it's one of those memories that we will all have, that we remembered exactly where we were when that happened. And I was teaching in Ohio and had students whose parents were in New York and Washington, D.C. and didn't know what was going on, and just the terror of that day, and having to remain calm and work with my students who couldn't reach their parents, and some of them were traveling on vacation, some were on business, and helping to calm the setting and the mood of all of my students. And if anybody else has any memories or anything that they'd like to share in remembrance of 9/11, I'm grateful for those who stepped up and our first responders, and so grateful that we live in a country with the freedoms that we have and the people that we have who pulled together and lifted each other up, gave each other a hand up after 9/11. So those are just some brief thoughts. If anybody has anything that they'd like to share, that would be fine as well. Member Phillips and then Member Spiker.
I don't usually get emotional, so I apologize. I had the unusual experience that day of finding a student in his class and informing him that his father was alive, after we'd gotten word that he had been delayed in arriving at the buildings that were later destroyed. And I say pace to the Utah State Board of Education when so that I won't be in danger of losing my license, when I say that the student fell into my arms, which is against the rules for a teacher, and sobbed while I held him, a high school student, because he was so relieved. But it's something that that touched so many different lives and reminded us of our unity as a nation and of the things that we hold in common and so dear. Thank you.
Beautifully stated. Thank you, Cindy.
And I could, thank you. I could pick up on that exactly. It's been an interesting week, thinking about just in the backdrop of where we are politically and what the decisions that have been made by our government in the last few weeks in the backdrop of the 20th anniversary. And I too was teaching high school students, and we were watching the morning announcements. And it was interrupted by this special news report. And at first, the students thought it was a joke, and it became very clear what was taking place. I think for many of us, it was the first time in our generation that we had experienced anything like that, an attack of that nature and such a tragedy. And I'll just say that I think that makes me think the importance of this work that we do as a board, because there are teachers in all of our charter schools this very moment, this week, that are making decisions on how they're going to teach this event. How are they going to navigate all of the variables that brought that moment to be, right, with students? And we're also at a time where the majority of our students, in fact, all of them in our K-12 system, have no memory or recollection because they were not alive at the time. So that provides us an even greater challenge as educators on how do we make this relevant, timely, and also so critical. And I too have been so moved this week because I feel we are so polarized right now as a country. We're so divided, and I'll never forget how I felt, even though it was such a tragedy. But as an American citizen, that year was unlike anything I had ever experienced before in my life, and probably since then. So I would implore us all to think deeply what brought us together at that time, and also understand and appreciate that our educators are out there trying to teach our students so we don't repeat the mistakes of our history. So I just want to say thank you for bringing it up. I thought about it as I stood and said the pledge, so I really appreciate taking the time for us to recollect and make it clear how important it is to do so. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Spiker. I do think your comment is very interesting, that those who are in school today, to them it's history, the same as World War I or World War II or, the JFK assassination. It's not something that they have anything to grasp onto because they weren't alive during that time. So thank you for bringing that up. Any other thoughts, Member Bassett?
When 9/11 occurred, I was actually a student at Westminster College in this valley. And it very much, as I reflect on my experience there, I'm considering the value of a teacher. Because I woke up that morning and was able to go class to class and have that support of an academic community, but also professors who listened and allowed us time to process and reflect and write and discuss. And it was a very, I've always been grateful that I was in that environment because we were given arms around us as we worked through all of our thoughts and fears and feelings. So I remember 9/11 absolutely as a space that I was allowed to grieve in a very supportive academic environment, and I've always been very grateful for that.
Thanks for adding that perspective. I appreciate that. Any other thoughts, comments?
And I may not have, except that something that Chair Tonk said that brought it back to me. But that morning, I was a high school principal that year. So I was, we'd had a meeting. You may remember that right after that, Salt Lake hosted the Olympics. It was just a few months following. And so I'd had a meeting that morning because the high school where I was the principal, we were hosting an Olympic torch run. And so a big event, and it was fun, fireworks in the snow and everything. But we were talking about that. And then this huge change to our day happened, to our lives, to our future. The thing I wanted to add is, as Chair Tonk said, that it's now history. That day, I walked around to, I just remember hurrying from one social studies class to the other and say, don't teach what you were planning to teach today, because history is happening. So turn on your televisions and talk about what you're seeing and do it. One of those, Representative Briscoe, was one of those social studies teachers that day too, and to say, this is history now happening. Take the time to discuss it and be a part of it right now today. So it was, wow, what a change in our lives. Yeah, thank you.
Very much so. Thank you for adding that, Brian. Any other thoughts? I think it would be appropriate to do a 60-second just moment of silence in remembrance of those whose lives were lost, either not by choice or by rushing in to help those who were struggling. So let's take 60 seconds. Thank you, everyone. All right, our next item on the agenda is the Executive Director Report, and we'll turn it over to Director Lambert.
Wow, that's hard to follow. I just very briefly to add, because what my message is going to be much less solemn, but in the past, just even in the past week, I've had a number of schools contact me, and just with just dealing with people very passionate on different sides of issues, and just having very just a lot of let's say passionate viewpoints being expressed. And it's a really wonderful reminder that all of you have shared about unity and support, and I just really appreciate that. It's a great time to remember that we can come together and be unified even if we don't always agree. So thank you. Now, much less solemn, what I plan to do, since it's September, it's kind of like the quarter is ending, I wanted to just report on how staff's progress on your board goals. I'm not going to provide data because I'm not going to make my staff compile the data every 3 months, might do that at the 6-month mark, but I did want to just report to you kind of what we're doing. So the first goal is communicate, and just for your reminder, it's by January 2022, which is coming up very soon. One or more Utah State Charter School Board members or UCS or staff members will have met with all of our schools. I can tell you as staff, we are very well on our way. We've been able to create the infrastructure that allows us to have portfolio managers that can make those connections with schools. And they've been able to make the connections with all of the schools who are receptive to that. There's a few outliers that we're just working to get a hold of. But it's been, for the most part, very positive, and I really want to publicly thank all of the staff efforts in doing that. In terms of support, it says, again, this one's coming up soon, January 2022, 50% of charter governing board members will be trained on expectations of governing board members and effective school governance. We have increased our training offerings to board members, and we have gotten increased participation on that, but this one is a difficult one, mostly because we don't have teeth. We can't force. We can offer the water, we can't force them to drink it. And so, but Marie's done a really great job in reaching out the offerings. We have begun a monthly governing board meeting. So we have a monthly directors meeting where we present information to directors. We've started that with governing board members. The attendance is slowly building, but it is going in the right direction. And we are pleased to see that some school board members are taking advantage of that so that they, in there, it's a shorter meeting than the one we do to directors, of course. We provide training there, and we also provide just kind of updates of things so that they're aware of governing board members. We also put those things, and a lot of our trainings are also available on demand online, and it's difficult, not impossible, for us to track the board members who are accessing that. So it is quite possible that we're reaching more board members than we realize, but that is something that we are working towards, but there are some challenges with that. The third goal is monitor, and it's by the end of school year 2023, so we have a little more of a ramp on this one. All charter schools authorized by us will have all the required policies publicly available, and will basically be following the Open and Public Meetings Act. They'll have their meetings posted, minutes recorded, et cetera. We right now are focusing on that second part, and what we're doing is we call them campaigns. So we're taking something that maybe our charter schools could improve in, and we are doing this campaign where there's the ramp up. If we were to just say, look at this, and everyone who's not following it, we just send them a notice of concern. Notice of concerns are no longer at the level that they used to be, but that's just a lot of extra work on staff to draft all of those and do that. So instead what we're doing is we're letting them know, hey, here's the statutes, there's some back and forth where maybe clarification on exactly what is required in statute. And so we're working with them on that. Sometime in the next month or two, those that are still not in compliance, that's when we'll send the notice of concerns, and then we'll work with them through the notice of concern to get them in compliance. If by at the end of the time, so that by, SY 2023, anyone who's not in compliance, they've been given so many opportunities, we would then recommend that they be put on warning, because at that point, there should be no excuse because we've given them a path to be able to get into compliance. We will be doing the same thing with that first one, but we didn't want to overburden schools and doing everything at once, so we're just taking one at a time. And then the last one is Innovate, and it is that for the 25-26 cohort, we will begin publishing new models and practices to inspire new school applications. And we're also looking to increase the percentage of SCSB schools in the top 100 schools in the state. So we are working on this. If you think of the 25-26 cohort, that seems like it's way out. It isn't. And so we are right now, we have Robert Kohutek, who is working on looking at what's going on right now, like where is our distribution of schools, and just coming with some information from that. At the same time, what we're looking at is the ISIP grant. So for those of you who may not remember, ISIP stands for Innovative School Improvement Program. It was where we used some of our carry forward funds to offer additional funding to schools who wanted to do a new project or try something. The deal for the money was that if they accept the money, then they have to be willing to report on the outcomes of it. So we are going to be compiling that data, and we figure that that might be a really good place to start. A lot of times when schools come, sometimes the comment is, well, do you know if this works? Or maybe it might be better to try this as a program first. So what we're doing is we're looking at where some of our schools have tried some of these different programs, and we are using that to help us inform for the Innovate. For the second part of that, about increasing the percentage of schools in the top 100, that is a little bit challenging right now with data, just knowing where schools stand and the whole, with COVID, we're getting some first data out from the RISE testing from last year, and there's the participation rates were lower last year than they have been in the past. And we've had some challenges, especially in some of our charter schools already, with opt-out rates. So we're still looking at that. The state's looking at that. From what I've heard, I think we might be doing better than other states. I don't know if that means anything, but just good job to all of our educators on that. And that is my report.
Thank you. I really appreciate the update on our goals. Sometimes we set goals as a board and then revisit them at the next strategic planning meeting, and I much prefer getting updates along the way. So thank you to staff, and thank you especially to Director Lambert for keeping us as a board on track with the goals that we put in place. Appreciate that. Okay, we'll move to our consent calendar. We have 3 items: our minutes from August 12th, our monthly financial report, and then our revised meeting schedule for school year '22. If you'll take a look at that, make sure that you've noted the different dates that are on there that have been added or changed because of scheduling issues. And I highly recommend putting those on your personal calendars now so that it's not a surprise when you find out that the November meeting next year is on a Wednesday instead of a Thursday. At this point, I will entertain a motion for the consent calendar.
I'd like to move to accept the consent calendar.
Okay, we have a motion and by Member Phillips and a second by Member Smith. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Seeing none, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. At this point, I'm going to turn the time back over to Director Lambert for our board elections.
Thank you, Chair Tonks. So according to your bylaws, the vice chair is tasked with overseeing the elections. Vice Chair Bowles directed staff to collect those that were interested in running for chair and vice chair. And so we did that. The only interest that was expressed to me was Delana Tonks to run again as chair and Brian Bowles to run again as vice chair. Of course, you can make nominations or express interest here. However, if this is, if there's no contest, then you can just do a simple vote and for Chair Tonks to be chair again and Vice Chair Bowles to be vice chair again. If there is other interest, then we can direct from there and do a vote.
Member Phillips.
Could I make a motion? I'd like to move that Chair Tonks be, continue in her role as chair of the State Charter School Board, and that Vice Chair Bowles also continue in his role as vice chair of the State Charter School Board.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second to the motion? Okay, Member Smith, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? If you're opposed, you have to be the chair. Okay, seeing none, that motion passes unanimously. And thank you. I want to voice my appreciation for your support as board members. On behalf of both Vice Chair Bowles and myself, that means a lot to us that you're willing to be supportive and of us, and thank you for that. All right, our next item on the agenda is the spotlight. These are the teachers, the charter school teachers who were nominated for Teacher of the Year, and Dr. William Evans is going to be doing a quick presentation on that.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I believe we do have some of our teachers who are online joining us from Zoom. So at this point, if you're here or still able to join us, you can turn on your cameras. And thank you guys for joining us. So there were about, I think, 9 teachers in total from the charters that were nominated. And we are... sorry, I'm just getting this up and running. We're just very lucky to have them here with us in charters and for the great work that they're doing. we're so glad to have them here. I want to invite Miss Marie Stephenson to come join me for just a minute because she participated in the committee that did all the evaluating of, for all the Teacher of the Year across the state. And there we go. Oh, there we go, technology. Just to give you kind of a quick overview about what happens with this. So the teachers get nominated by the administration at their LEA level. And then there's actually an application that the teacher has to fill in. And so they then collect a bunch of information, fill in this, this application. So this isn't just someone, send your name in and you're automatically put here. There is some work for this. At that point, then a committee is convened. Marie, do you want to explain who is part of that committee?
Yes, the committee consists of members of staff from USBE, as well as the superintendency. There are members of the teacher union associations. I'm there representing charters. We have the past winner of the Teacher of the Year from the prior year that serves on that committee as well. And we read all of those applications that come in. Do you want me to continue on with that
no,
process?
yeah.
We read all of those applications that come in and score them. And then once all those scores are received by the committee that is led by a member of the staff here at USBE, they narrow it down to the top 5 finalists, and those finalists are invited in for an interview. With that interview, they are asked a number of questions by the committee, and then from there, a winner is chosen from those finalist interviews. They get to then, everybody who was nominated, so whether you fill out that application or you just had the nomination, everyone is invited to an awards dinner, and then they have a number of speaking engagements. There's a grand prize of $10,000, and they all get wonderful little trophies to take with them and remember their experience. And it's really a great committee to serve on and fun to see what's happening in our classrooms.
Thanks, Marie. So one of the things that I really like about this, so these are the teachers that we have here, and let me go to the next slide. Amy Butterfield, Carl Young, so from C.S. Lewis Academy and then the Walden School of Liberal Arts. David Buckley, who's joining us today via Zoom. Jamie Jensen from Guadalupe School. John Perry Christensen from Utah County Academy of Science, and Judy Johnston. Judy's here as well, from Valley Academy Charter. Rachel Wilkinson, who's here joining us from Odyssey Charter School. Sarah Holden from Treeside Charter School. And then Sky from Greenwood. Sky, you're here. Yes, Sky's here as well. Face is kind of covered up there by our other screen. So these are our teachers who completed the application. And the reason we wanted to just spotlight them is just for the great work that they're doing in our classrooms. 2021 was not an easy year to teach. And so these teachers just did an excellent job, and we're just grateful for the work that they've put forward for our students, and wanted to give a little opportunity for you as the board to talk with them and meet them individually. So at this point, I'll turn it back over to the board. Any questions or any comments for the teachers?
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Congratulations to all of you. That is, it takes a monumental effort, especially in last year, to be able to get through the school year and do what you needed to do as teachers and to be supportive of your students. So thank you, each one of you, for choosing to be teachers and choosing to be such effective and highly qualified teachers. Board members, any questions? Member Phillips, go ahead.
Just to start out, can we just be loud and clap for these people? Are you okay with that?
Any questions for our teachers, our Teacher of the Year candidates? Okay, Member Phillips?
And maybe they could each respond. How did you get through last year, and what was your maybe what accomplishment are you most satisfied with in what you were able to accomplish last year?
Let's do this. Let's start with David, and then, is this Jody? Judy?
No, that's.
This,
So David, Rachel, and then Judy, and then Sky.
let's go in that order, if you wouldn't mind responding. Sorry to put you on the spot. We'd love to hear what you have to say, though.
No problem. Thank you. And I'll have to leave in a few minutes because my next class is coming in. But last year, what got me through the year was just finding ways to have fun with the kids. We needed a break from all the protocols and things like that. I love being at a charter school because I get to wear lots of different hats. I coach the cross country team, so I got to go run outside after school with the kids. And I also coach the Frisbee team. So got to do that in the spring. And so just finding ways in and outside of class to have fun, take a break every now and then, play a game, do a get to know you, whatever it was. Because between going back and forth between online, school, and coming back in, all those sorts of things, they were so, burdened with all of their responsibilities. So that was it for me.
Okay, for me last year, I think it was just the fact that I did survive. It was quite hard to go into, we started off doing hybrid where we were being video recorded in our live classes for our online students, and that was not sustainable. It wasn't working at all. So after term 1, they asked me to do only online for all the first and the second graders. I never taught first grade before, so that was quite a challenge. And I had to create a whole new curriculum on how to take what we're learning and put it online so that we could support the learners at home and give them the same education. So it was not an easy task. I'm glad that it's over and I'm back in the classroom again, but I am grateful that I did have that opportunity because this year we've been able to implement a lot more technology that we had never done before. So now I'm able to see things that we did last year and think, wow, that's a whole lot easier, and do it within the classroom this year.
Okay. Being in the special education department was a lot of different challenges. Like been mentioned before, we had special education students that were online, and that was a tricky way to provide service minutes. And so we worked with our aides to provide additional online help for them. I am happy to say, as part of the accomplishment, we didn't have any special education students opt out of the RISE test last year. They all took it, and we had some that did very well. So that was a big one for us, is just to help the students realize the importance of taking the test. It's been a wild ride, as everyone knows, but I feel like we came out of it a much stronger special ed department within Valley, that we saw where the needs were and saw where we needed to push in a little harder as far as support goes. And so I feel like that in itself, working with the teachers that were teaching online while teaching in the classroom and having the support in the classroom that they needed, was very imperative, that we were able to help them accomplish in the classrooms what they needed to do with the special ed students that were in there.
Next. All right, so I teach kinder, so I had some trouble getting 5-year-olds to keep their masks on their face. We did a lot of the masks over the eyes and just them wanting to share and touch everything. And then we, here at Greenwood, we were teaching a hybrid for a while. So I was teaching in person as well as recording myself while I'm teaching and trying to engage those students through Zoom that were at home that didn't feel comfortable coming in. But we ended up transitioning to a similar situation where we had an online teacher that would teach K through second. Just last year was a challenge in itself just because of everything going on with COVID, and my school was in turnaround. We are out of turnaround, so yay for that. Just trying to make sure that the kids were making the growth that they needed to. But my charter is very blessed in the fact that they value a lot of mindfulness and outdoor education. So we were able to set up outdoor learning areas where we were able to social distance and teach outside. So that was a real blessing for us.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being here. Teaching in 3 different modalities, trying to do live, distance, and asynchronous online all at the same time. Just my heart goes out to you. I know how hard that is, and I'm interested because it sounds like your schools came to the same conclusions, that it would be easier to have one person focus on online and other people be able to focus on the other 2 modalities. So that was interesting to me. And Judith, thanks for your work with our special education population. That is very difficult to do in general, but online does make it more difficult. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate you, we honor you, and we thank you for your hard work, and we'll let you get back to it. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Evans and Ms. Stephenson. It's great to see our charter school teachers represented in the Teacher of the Year program that is statewide. So thank you for working with them and for bringing them here to us today.
You're very welcome. We're looking forward next year to having more teachers from the charters nominated. So that's one thing for our leaders to think about, is how they can nominate those teachers next year. So
Very good. Thank you, thank you. Okay, at this point, we welcome the Director of Law and Professional Practices, Ben Rasmussen. He is going to be doing some training on grandma. That's grandma, not grandma, just so you're aware. And we welcome you, and thanks for doing our training today, Ben.
All right, let's see if I can get connected here. So as she said, my name is Ben Rasmussen. I am the records officer. In addition to being Director of Law and Professional Practices, I'm records officer for USBE and for the State Charter School Board and a few other things too. So I want to talk to you today about grandma, give you a little bit of basic understanding about what grandma is and how it works, and somewhat of how it applies to you as Charter School Board members, some things to keep in mind as far as your communications with each other and members of the public that you may have contact with regarding Charter School Board issues. So, let's see. So the first thing to be aware of with grandma is that it's predicated on 2 fundamental constitutional rights to the public. The public has a right of access to information concerning the conduct of the public's business. And there's also a right of privacy in relation to personal data gathered by governmental entities. So the legislature has put our grandma law together, trying to balance these 2 interests so that the public can have access to information, but we can also restrict information that protects the right of privacy. But what you'll see is that in the implementation of grandma, it's definitely the legislature's intent to really, when there's a balancing of interests, that balance is definitely going to skew very heavily towards the public having access to just about whatever they want. This is right out of the statute. This is the legislative intent. The public should have easy and reasonable access to unrestricted public records. They want to prevent abuse of confidentiality by governmental entities, and they want to favor public access when in the application of the act there are countervailing interests of equal weight. So that's something you'll see if there's ever challenges, especially that go to the records committee when an agency is reluctant to produce records. You go to the records committee and they review it, and in my experience, they pretty much just give the public what they want. But it's not quite that black and white, but it can feel that way because there definitely is they definitely favor giving things to the public. So in the grandma law, every person has the right to inspect a public record free of charge, and we'll talk a little bit about what a record is. But a record is public unless it's otherwise expressly provided by statute that it's not. There are a few categories that are not considered public. There are private records, which are generally records containing some type of personal information about an individual. Controlled records are generally medical or psychological type of records about an individual that, you know, we clearly wouldn't want to release. And protected records are more things that are of a sensitive nature to the government entity. So that might be something that's an attorney-client privilege with your AG. That might be procurement type of things. There's a long list of things that are considered protected under the grandma law, but that we can restrict producing things to the public. So, let's see. So, what is a record? So this kind of gives you an idea of a bunch of things that might be considered a record under grandma. Pretty much just about anything is considered a record under grandma. So you can see books, photographs, recordings, binary data, maps, you know, emails, definitely letters. All that is considered basically anything that can be reproduced in a tangible form that the public can access is generally going to be considered a record under grandma. Question becomes then, is it public? A record is something, to be public, it needs to be something that is prepared, owned, received, or retained by a governmental entity or political subdivision. So the State Charter School Board would fall under that classification as a governmental entity, and where all the information in the original is reproducible by photocopy or other mechanical or electronic means. So that first part of that definition I want you to keep in mind, because we're going to talk about a few things as they pertain to you, but even though this is what the statute says, it's not always that black and white in how it's interpreted. So I want you to just put that in the back of your mind, that that's what a record is supposed to be, but we'll kind of talk about how they apply it in practice. Things that are not records that we would not have to produce are if there's a personal note, a temporary draft. That applies a lot of the times to requests we get as staff are working on drafts before they become public. Privately owned documents, copyrighted or patented material, proprietary software, personal calendars, private phone numbers. These are just a few examples. There's a long list. I think child pornography is on that list. There's just a long list of things that aren't considered records. But those are generally the exceptions to the rule as to how that applies. So I want to talk to you about two specific things that I think are going to be primarily applicable in your work as charter board members. So first I want to talk to you about emails and how the grandma law applies to your emails. So just so that you know, as far as emails with your staff, all USBE and State Charter School Board emails are preserved by our informational technology team. They have a database that, as all state agencies, are required to preserve emails for at least 7 years. For executive decision makers, those records are maintained permanently, but for all of your charter board staff, they would fall under that 7-year category. Just as a side note, it's kind of interesting because if for cities or local government entities, they only have to save their emails for like 3 years. But for state agencies, for whatever reason, they've decided that we have to save it even longer so that we can go back for grandma requests. So that's how it would apply with regards to the charter school board. So the state archives is the agency that kind of handles saving records when they're needed and also makes a lot of guidelines for agencies for how they should save records. They've given some guidelines that state provided email should be considered the primary venue for conducting state business, and such business should not be conducted using third-party email providers. Email should be preserved and managed consistent with state record policies and rules. And so when we give counsel, we generally say that board members should use a schools.utah.gov email for board business. So I know I'm not giving you a lot of help here because I know that in the past, from what Director Lambert has told me, she's asked our IT team to give you guys access to a schools.utah.gov email, and they haven't done that in the past. I'm going to follow up with them and see if I can get them to reconsider that. I don't know if my sway will have any input, but that is definitely the council, is that you should have a state email for your business, especially where you're in kind of a high-profile position, making decisions on opening and closing schools, those kinds of things. I think we need to work on that, and so that's something that we will work on. In the meantime, one way we can preserve it is if you are discussing charter school board business, the counsel would be that you should copy charter school board staff. So easiest way to do that is to copy Jennifer when you're talking about charter school board business. If you're talking about a specific project one of the other staff is working on, looping them in also meets that requirement. As long as one of them is copied on it, it goes into our system, and then if we get a GRAMAR request, we get a public records request, those are saved for 7 years so that we can access them. We can run keyword search. We can search for your email in that way, and we can find those records. Until we get you a schools.utah.gov email address, that's the best way to make sure your records are preserved. Now, if you're doing business with your personal email and you don't copy one of staff, what happens is, and we've had this happen a few times, where we'll get a GRAMAR request for all the correspondence from the charter school board regarding this item of public business or their discussions about this charter school that was under consideration. And in that case, I have to send out an email to all of you and say, we have this GRAMAR request. I need you all to search your personal emails. I had to do that to our state board last week, basically just asking for anything you may have sent that wasn't on the board servers so that we can make sure that we produce that. But you should understand that if you're talking about matters of charter school board business on your personal emails, those are going to be considered public records. Now, what about text messages? Because we're in a time where people don't email anymore, they text. So this is a little bit hard to read, but this is a Dear Abby letter that was sent to the archives records team. And there's a couple things I want to emphasize for it. Basically, this is a letter from a city recorder that was asking archives how they should handle retention of text messages involving their city council members. And they emphasized the language in red is that text messages like email are considered correspondence for GRAMAR purposes. And so correspondence has to be classified, it has to be preserved if it deals with state businesses. Text messages typically fall into the transitory correspondence category and can be deleted as soon as the content has been acted on. But if for any reason a text message documents a business decision, it may need to be downloaded and kept in a record-keeping system for a longer amount of time. So first, let's talk about transitory correspondence, because their advice was if it's a transitory correspondence, it doesn't need to be kept long, it can be deleted, it's not really a big deal. What is transitory correspondence? So that is incoming and outgoing correspondence, regardless of format or mode of transmission, related to matters of short-term interest. Transitory correspondence is transitory unless part of another process, and this does not impact agency functions. So this is your lunch plans with another board member. This is comments on how boring the meeting is without going into the substance of the meeting. This is notes to Director Lambert or the chair that you're running late for the meeting. This is congratulations on your new grandkid. This is sorry your dog died. Those are all transitory type texts that you would not need to save. You could delete those and we would not care about this. But other texts may be produced. Now, I want to go back to that definition because I told you that records are generally items that are prepared, retained, received, or owned by the government entity. And if you're like me, you're saying to yourself, the charter board doesn't pay for my phone. I don't think you pay for any of their phones, do you? So the charter board doesn't pay for your phones. What business do they have to see your texts, right? The records committee doesn't necessarily see it that way. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a case that the state records committee has had a couple cases on this. But one that they had just recently this year was involving Utah County and a county commissioner down there. There was a GRAMAR request to Utah County seeking text messages from the county commissioners dealing with some matter that was before the county commission down there. And the Utah County said, these are private records. That's from their phones. That's not owned by the government. Why would we produce those? So this is what the Records Committee, which makes these decisions, says. They said it would be inappropriate for a public official to attempt to circumvent the requirements of the Open and Public Meetings Act and GRAMA by using a private device while conducting the people's business. A record prepared by a government employee within his or her capacity as a government employee may be a record subject to GRAMA. And they also, you're not technically government employees, you're just appointed members of the State Charter School Board, but you are an appointed public official. And so they said specifically that there is a higher standard of transparency for elected or appointed officials. And so I think what you would find is if we got a GRAMA request asking for text dealing with charter school board business from any of you, that we would probably have to come to you. And if you're talking about charter board business on your phone, we would have to have you search your phones and produce texts. This is something that is kind of a new trend. We're starting to see requests like this for our board members. I hope we don't end up getting a lot for you guys, but it's just something to be, for our state board members, I should say. But, it could come where they're asking for something that's before the charter board. It's bound to happen that you're making a decision that's controversial or that's getting a lot of public attention, and then we get the press and the public that thinks there's something that they want to see. And so we get requests. So what should you do with your text messages? So first thing that I would suggest is if you're talking about issues before the charter board again, I would recommend that be done by email, copied to Director Lambert or a member of the charter school board staff. If you do end up having a text conversation with a fellow board member or a constituent about something that's charter school board business, we actually need to preserve those text messages. And so what you would need to do is you would need to work with the charter school board's data steward. Jennifer, who is that?
Robert Kahutek.
There you go. So Robert would be the one who could help you figure out how to download those, get those to the charter school board so that their staff could actually save those in the case that there's ever a GRAMA request or a need to review those records on that issue. And so, that's something to keep in mind. The other piece of advice to keep in mind is be conscientious about what you include in your correspondence. It's easy to make an offhanded comment, a sarcastic comment that the recipient will understand and probably laugh at, but when the public gets a hold of, they may not understand it in the same light. And so with your emails, with your texts, there's something that I tell teachers when I train them is unless you want it to end up on the front page of the Deseret News or the Salt Lake Tribune or the web page of the Tribune now, you want to be very careful about what you say. So that's a little bit about GRAMA. I'm happy to answer your questions about how the law works today, any questions you have about emails or texts. I'm happy to see if I can answer those questions for you.
This is just a curiosity question. If you've seen an increase in those requests in the last 18 months or even in this last 6 months or 3 months as schools are reopening, just in the spirit of the conversations that are taking place, I'm just curious what you're seeing.
So especially for the State Board of Education, we're getting more GRAMA requests than we've ever seen right now. I'm probably getting 3 or 4 GRAMA requests a week where I used to get maybe 3 or 4 GRAMA requests a month. And so we have, the press is obviously paying heightened attention to things that are going on with the State Board. We're getting a lot more requests to see what the board is doing procurement-wise. We probably get 1 or 2 requests a month for the charter school board, I would say, for things to see for various issues that your staff is dealing with. And definitely with the state board, we're getting a lot more right now with particular controversial topics, critical race theory, some of the other things that are in the news. The public is definitely interested.
Hi, Ben.
Hi.
Can you help us? I'm a little unclear on what a personal document is. And I think an example in my mind would have been a letter of reprimand that has been all over the news. Would that not have been a personal document until it became public? How did that, what defines a personal document? Something that I don't share?
So a personal record isn't really defined in GRAMA. What is defined in GRAMA is primarily what is a public record. And so when we were looking at that specific record, we looked at the fact that it's clearly a record because it's a letter sent out by leaders of the State Board of Education, and it dealt with a matter of the public business because it was dealt with the conduct of a member of the State Board of Education. So basically, if you've got letters being sent out by leaders or by members of a public body that deal with something that is a matter before that public body, that's generally going to be considered a public record.
Thank you.
Ben, can I expand on that?
Be my guest.
The statute talks about what that a record does not, has been mentioned, it does not mean a personal note or personal communication, but it goes on to explain kind of what that is. It does not mean a personal note or personal communication prepared or received by an employee or an officer of a governmental entity in a capacity other than the employer or officer's governmental capacity, or that is unrelated to the conduct of the public's business. I don't know if that makes it more clear or not, but a personal note would be like a birthday card, you know, because it doesn't mean the notes you might take in this meeting, so that you keep track of what the arguments are for pro and a con, various things, that type of thing.
An example of another thing that we would treat as not a public record that we actually got was we got a GRAMA request to the state board, basically seeking emails sent by a staff member about a personal matter. It was basically a divorce situation, and the spouse wanted to know what the staff member was talking about in that regard. And so, you know, we looked into the matter. We were like, this is not public business, so we're not gonna respond to it as a public record.
Right, but a follow-up, Chair, please. If I were to, let's say I drafted a document and I hadn't shared this document, but it was of board concern, is that still open to the public? Now, if I had reached out to another board member or a member of the State Charter School Board with this document and said, hey, put your eyes on this, is that the moment it becomes public record? Is it still personal to me if it's my document that I haven't shared?
Personal notes and temporary drafts are
Okay.
not considered records.
But as soon as I
But
say,
if
hey,
you-
take
if
a
you
look
s-
at this.
If you send an email to the board or your fellow board members and say, these are my thoughts on this topic, then you're probably looking at it becoming a public record.
Thank you.
Other questions? Now, everybody has questions. Let's go with Vice Chair Bowles and then Member Olson.
Just quickly, because sometimes schools ask us questions as well about record retention particularly, and I'm always unsure about how long records should be retained. You indicated 7 years for a state agency. Do our schools fall under that umbrella of a state agency and they should retain records for 7 years, email, other kinds of records? And I'm also including in that, I always recommend that if they have a hiring interview and they're making any kind of record, they create a record of that interview, that all of those must also be retained. So is that 7 years for a school as well?
So as far as email and correspondence, I think that 7 years would apply to schools as well, is my understanding. You ever get questions from schools about how long they should save records? There's a couple resources that you can use. There are numerous record schedules that apply to every different type of document that schools use. And we actually have an individual here at USBE who works with me on records, John Lyman. He has prepared actually a document that shows schools how each different type of record they might have is classified, and he works with a number of schools to help them get their records house in order, so to speak. And so John Lyman is someone we can put them in contact with. The other person we can put them in contact with is a gal named Avalon Snell that works at the state archives. She is specifically assigned to help USBE and any of the schools throughout the state with their records questions. So she's the one that the state assigns to help them understand that. So if you ever have those questions, I encourage you to you can refer them to me and I'll get them to the right person.
Thank you. Thank you.
As an attorney that makes grammar requests all the time for use in litigation, I never cease to be amazed by the things that elected officials or appointed officials will say in writing. And I always advise my clients to be really careful what you put in a text or an email, and you should expect that it could be Exhibit A in a lawsuit that's something that's filed with the court. For all of us, it could be that, or it could be on the front page of the newspaper, as you say. So I just want to echo your comment and your counsel to just be very, very cautious what we say in writing. But I appreciate your presentation. It's very helpful.
I'm going to +1 what Member Olson just said. Yes, please. Any other comments? Member Phillips, go ahead.
I appreciate the training today, too. And I just wanted to confirm my understanding of a couple things because I hate to do other people's work for them. So my understanding is, regardless of a request, that an institution, a public institution, does not have to create a record that does not exist, nor reformat or package up in a pretty bow and, wrapping paper records they do keep under the specifications that someone else requests them. And then also that if that information is available publicly already, then the public institution that receives a grammar request does not have to do acrobatics in order to find that information for somebody else, if they can find it on their own.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like we'll frequently get grandma requests wanting information on what the state board is spending on certain things. And one of my favorite things that they have now is the Transparent Utah website, because they can all go to that website. Everybody feeds into it. It's public. And so that saves us a lot of trouble in responding to grandmas. And you're right, as far as having to prepare records, one example that we got recently was a grandma request wanting a list of phone numbers out of Cactus on all our educators. And we don't have to go in there and take data that's not accessible to the public and create a list for them because we don't have to prepare, tailor, manipulate, package information. That's exactly right.
Good comments, Member Phillips. Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Director Asmussen? Okay, thank you for being here. We really appreciate you doing some training on this, and helpful for us and helpful for all of our schools as well. So thank you.
Happy to help.
Okay, and at this point, just a couple minutes late, 11:40 is lunchtime, and we're at about 11:42, so we will head downstairs for lunch for a little break. And be back at 12:40. Yeah, and this was a good presentation, but my favorite presentations that Ben does are the UPAC presentations, which I then lift and present to my faculty, who all walk out white-faced and very, very careful about everything that they do. So thank you for providing those trainings as well.
If I can add,
We love you, Ben. Okay, welcome back to the State Charter School Board meeting for September 9th, everybody. Thank you, staff, for providing a wonderful lunch for us. We will move to the OEK funding amounts, and Ms. Stephenson is all set and ready to give us an optional enhanced kindergarten presentation so we can see where the funds are going for this. Thanks, Marie.
Thank you, Chair Tonks. All right, so wanted to start off with just some context and some history of the OEK, or Optional Enhanced Kindergarten Grant Funding. As you can see from this slide, OEK comes from both statute and board rule. It is a funding formula that we receive, and for charters, it's about 10% of the overall funding. Because it is that smaller amount, that 10%, in charters, it is application-based for those who are able to receive the Optional Enhanced Kindergarten Award. With the funding and the application, the schools can use it to serve eligible students through a variety of ways. That includes full-day kindergarten or extra hours, so maybe not a full day, but some additional time, or other means. And that other means typically refers to having an extra aid or some manipulatives, some extra curriculum that they can use. Also, with the Optional Enhanced Kindergarten, it does have to tie to both literacy and math and be research-based as far as the method that the school is choosing to use these funds on in their application. For some history and context, in the 2020 legislative session, it was presented that 40% of students in the state of Utah enter kindergarten at risk. This is looking at the entire state, so not just our charter schools, but throughout the state, 40% enter kindergarten at risk. With that, across the state of Utah, 24% have access to an OEK program at their school, and that's compared to 80% nationally. Again, this is our entire state, not our charters, but keeping in mind that with that 24% access, our schools are eligible to get 10% of that through an application. So during that 2020 legislative session, there was a request for $8.6 million ongoing to fund additional classrooms with OEK funds. And the hope was that with that additional funding, that we could, as a state, get early intervention in place for about 40% of our kindergarten students. So still below that 80% mark that we're hoping to get towards, but trying to capture more of those students who are at risk. As you know, the 2020 legislative session ended really well, and we had some funding in place, and then COVID happened, and so some of these funds got taken back. And so now I'm here to talk about where we're at right now. If you look at these graphs I put together of just the past 5 years of funding, and I showed it two different ways. The graph that shows the blue and the orange shows that our requests that we've received in charters have always outnumbered the funding that we've received. So the blue shows the amount of funds that have been requested by charter schools specifically, compared to the orange, which has been the funding that has been allocated each year. You can see that that orange has increased over time, but we are still having far more requests than the funding that we have available. If you look at the right side, that shows our LEAs that have applied for funding. So again, in charters, it is not just set that everybody receives the OEK, but that they can apply for this kindergarten enhancement. The gray shows the number of schools that have applied each year for the past 5 years, and then the gold are the schools we've been able to fund. So again, we've had this problem where asking for more funds, we've got schools that want it and want to use it, and we have not yet been able to meet those needs. So we have some exciting news though. With fiscal year 22 coming up, it'll be our first time that we actually have more funding than the requests that we have. So very exciting, I think, for and from some of that legislative money that has been allocated back to OEK. So the far right shows that the blue is our requested. Again, the orange is the funding we've received. And then on the right If we were to fund all of those who applied, that of course looks equal at this point. And then you'll note at the bottom, we have a little over 700,000 still remaining in OEK funds that have not had anyone apply for it. So with that, a happy problem that we are wanting to have our guidance of our board on is what to do with that remaining just over 700,000. So a few options that staff has come up with would be that we fund all 24 applicants, their full requested amount, and then of the three options, either reopen the grant and allow additional applicants to apply. We could give each current applicant LEA an equal amount of the remaining funding, or we could increase the per classroom amount. Currently, it's set at $30,000 per classroom for the charters that apply. A few pieces to keep in mind as you discuss these options. We do have some schools who apply for 1 classroom, and we have some schools that apply for like 7 or 8 classrooms. At this point, we have the funds that we could fund everything that they have applied for. However, in the past, where we have had the discrepancy between the funding that we have available and more schools wanting it, we have never funded like a request for 7 or 8. We've tried to, be judicious and maybe give them like 3 or 4 classrooms worth versus 7 or 8. So that would maybe be something you'd also like to consider in your direction to staff. If of the 24 applicants we've received, if we do want to fund all of them, if we want to go through and make some adjustments there as well, and how we would like to handle that. With that second bullet point, that could create some additional complication because, again, some of the schools have asked for 1 classroom and some have asked for 6 or 7. So giving an equal amount could be challenging. Just a lot to consider. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Otherwise, that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Stephenson, for putting that together. I love that we have the problem of where to put all the money that we have. It's great that we can fund the program. We'll open it up to questions from board members. Member Phillips, go ahead.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I'm wondering how many applicants were not able to be funded before, since it was a competitive grant? How many, when we're thinking about maybe ways to spread the joy, I'm just wondering what the number is of schools who in the past have asked for funds for their programs and maybe just weren't in as great a position of as great a need as the ones that you did fund, or some other metric that you felt it was better to award to the ones who in fact did receive the funds.
Thank you, Member Phillips. On the right side here, this shows the number applied versus the ability to fund. So if you look back in fiscal year 17, it was about 24 that applied and about 15 that we were able to fund. Fiscal year 18, 20 applied and about 8 or 9 were able to be funded. Fiscal year 19, 21 funded or applied and 12 were funded. Fiscal year 20, 23 applied and 13 were funded. And then fiscal year 21, we had about 27 applicants and 20 that received it. This year we do have 24 current applicants. And again, we have the funding that we could fund all of them, or if we make some adjustments, then that would free up additional funding that we could look at giving to other schools at this point as well.
Can I ask a follow-up question first and then? So I have a follow-up question to that. What I hear you saying is that these LEAs, multiple LEAs were unfunded because we didn't have the money to provide to them. Is that accurate, or were there applications that didn't meet the standards that wouldn't have been funded even if we had had all the dollars in the world?
The applications met the standards. Yes, so these were ones that were unable to be funded because of the lack of OEK funds.
It would seem then that maybe, and I would just love your thoughts on this since you've been so involved in the application review and other sorts of things, that it might be most advantageous to schools and maybe fairest to open up the application again. And if schools who applied for more monies that were not given such actually can demonstrate an even greater need for those monies, that would be a reason to provide that, as well as for schools who maybe have been discouraged because there hasn't been enough money and theirs kind of fell to more of the a need but not acute need phase, and they may find themselves in this more prosperous environment, a little bit more competitive. So what is your thought on that? Do you feel like that's, did you reject that recommendation, or is that a recommendation that you've been considering?
No, I think that would be in line with one of the recommendations as far as reopening the grant for additional applicants to apply. I think that would be a great choice if the board chooses to pursue that.
So not only just additional, but also make competitive additional monies for those who have been granted monies?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, may I ask a question on that?
Yes.
So I guess then the direction at that point would be if you wanted to award the 24 applicants and then open up competitively again the remaining, or if we wanted to like wait and do the whole thing competitive, is that, I guess that would be the direction I'd be seeking.
I think I'd prefer to fund it like we've funded everything in the past. Like, let's follow the protocol that has happened so that we're not going outside of that after the grant was already opened. And my thought would be that the schools would be expecting that it would happen the same way it's always happened.
Right.
Then you can do the new stuff. That's just my process-oriented. I used Member Phillips's term.
I agree. In other words, what I'm hearing is that we wouldn't just go and fund like 8 more classrooms for a school, but that we would open up the grant competitively to schools that are existing that have had some award, as well as others who may seek application, knowing that there are some monies that they might be able to use for the supports for their little ones.
Perfect. That makes sense.
And just to clarify, you need a motion for this, correct?
Yes, we are seeking a motion.
Okay. Member Phillips.
I would like to move that the OEK monies be opened up to all schools on a competitive basis, both those who have applied and those who have not, for review as per the surplus, as per the SBSB review process.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Okay, we have a motion by Member Phillips, a second by Member Smith. Is there any discussion to this motion? Dr. Spiker?
I just wanted to comment and also just state that I think it's important to reopen this again, one, for 2 reasons. I think that a lot of folks haven't had their mind necessarily on these emails, let's say, I think it's a great opportunity to give educators and administrators another chance to see this again. And there are major conversations about what kids have not learned or what has happened or not happened in the last 18 months. And so this funding is critical. And so I would just ask that when we send this out again, that maybe there's some language about that. Hey, we're here to support you. This money is available. We know that all of you, or not, well, many of you are thinking about how do we make up for losses that potentially happened. This could be a great resource for that, and maybe people might jump on it a little bit more.
I really like that thought. Thank you. Any other discussion to the motion? Okay, seeing none, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Rule that motion passes unanimously. Does that give you everything you need, Ms. Stephenson?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. Vice Chair Bowles has a follow-up question.
I didn't want to ask this question and muddy it with the funding because it's a separate issue, but this really is genuinely a question. As part of receiving the funds, the researcher in me wants to know if they are keeping data, do these dollars actually, do we get a return on that investment? Are students learning? Are they progressing? Are we seeing the advantage of that? I think that's so important for schools that maybe that is in place, and it's so important if that's true for requesting additional funds. But if we don't track that and show the benefit of it, it's hard to ask for more if we think it's viable. So I'm just, my curiosity is there an element that includes, are these monies making a difference?
Am I okay? Okay.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bowles. Yes, and I actually have the opportunity to work really closely with the Early Learning Department here at USBE. And they actually oversee the grant, but we help with the application process for the charters. And so, yes, they are tracking beginning, middle, and end of year, and they're working with those schools on how they're providing the services that they've described in their application. And then if they are not making adequate progress while receiving those funding, the school can enter a system of support with USBE, with a coach that works with them to help make sure that the money is being used in an effective manner for that school.
It was a very timely question. Thank you, and thanks for providing a nice answer to that. Okay, we will move on to our next agenda item, which is our carry forward funds spend plan with Director Lambert.
Thank you. You get to have another fun decision, I guess. So the carry forward spend plan is something that if there are funds that are left over from prior years, that we need to have a plan of how to spend them. I do want to make you aware, because of timing, so the Board of Education also needs to approve our budgets. And because of timing, their finance committee actually already heard this last week in their finance committee. They acknowledged that it's still pending your approval and that you could still make changes to this, but with the plan that we are submitting to you for their consideration was submitted to them, and they did recommend that their full board who will be hearing it next month, that they approve this. So I do want to make you aware of that. You can find it, I'm not going to show it on the screen, but you can find it under tab 4 in your binders. It's also is in our meeting materials on the website. Just to briefly go over, there's a few different pages, and each of those pages represent different buckets, for lack of a better term, of where our money sits. Each of those buckets have specific purposes for which that money can be spent. There is one bucket that we don't have any carry forward funds in, and that's called CHSA, which stands for the Startup Administration Funds. So we get, in legislation, they allocate normally $2.5 million. That's for startup funds, the mentoring grant, and then up to 8% can be used for administration, and that funds are well, it funds Marie is really in her activities. And so that's what it's used for, to help schools get up and running, and also to support them in doing what they, all the things that they have to do. I'll just start with the first page. That one is CHBD. It is your main budget. This is the bulk of our budget. This is not all that we have, of course. This is just carry forward from past years. I do want to note that it is higher this year, and we're not alone in this. Because of COVID, there's been decreases in travel, even just things that you wouldn't normally think about, like water or copies and things like that have decreased. And so things that we had in the budget and planned to spend, we didn't spend. And so you have a little bit higher this year. In here, I propose using this, and if you turn to the last page in ODPG, I have no idea what that stands for, but what that is at the beginning of COVID, any carry forward funds that we had, the legislature wiped. because they didn't know what they were looking at for the funding. And then when things became more certain, they knew what was going on, they returned it and it was put into this area. So my plan that I am recommending to you as the board is to use all of ODPG, and a good portion of what's carried forward in CHBD is to augment staff temporarily. We now, fortunately with some additional funding that came from the legislature recently, we now have these portfolio managers who are able to really just help us, like with the campaign I talked about in my director's report, just really helping schools now becoming more in compliance with open and public meetings and posting their minutes and things like that. We're able to do that and hopefully head off problems. But as we do that, we find that we're still playing catch up a lot. And so we could use in the short term to be able to hire a couple of additional employees to help us get over the hump and to be able to really ramp up. And so here I proposed that have one employee for at least 3 years and another employee for at least 5 years. We could, especially, kind of down the line, if we want to maybe equal that out 4 years, or maybe hire 3 employees for 3 years, we could maybe make adjustments. But right now, this is what I am recommending for that. Then the other pieces in that, according to our bylaws, every even-numbered year, we do a board review. And it's been quite a while since we've done an external board, had an external entity do a review. NACSA, which is the National Association for Charter School Authorizers, does a very comprehensive review where they will come in, they'll look at many different areas, they will give some support. We had, as board leadership, had contacted them, but then again, COVID hit. And so things were kind of derailed on that. It would be my proposal, I would like to be able to use your funds to be able to have that review done by that external entity. Then we had a contract out to help do some marketing, maybe help people understand more about the State Charter School Board, understand about charter schools in general, and also do trainings. Because, again, of COVID, I hate just keep saying that, but it's true. We weren't able to finish out the contract and before the contract ended. So that contract is ended. My proposal is to use the remaining amount that would have been on that contract to recontract for those same services that we had already planned on. And then the rest of the $100,000 would be used strategically when it's needed. Maybe it would be used to help with some of the funding of the staff, but to be able to carry out your mission and vision. Then if you turn to CHMT, that stands for the mentoring. Those are funds that were allocated to us from the legislature specifically for charter school mentoring. It is in statute. We have about 200,000, actually, yeah, this is in statute, 200,000 in carry forward. Marie's already been working on contracting with national mentors as well as within state mentors, and to cut this down, we do not have all of the exact plans of the exact mentors at this time, but we already have some of them planned, and we're going to see how those work. And if they are successful, we'll keep going with them and do them, again. If not, then we'll search for others. So we would like a little bit of flexibility that this is all for mentoring, to contract with mentors, but not maybe have it yet specific of who the mentors are. The next one is CHRG. That is for regional seminars. This is legislative intent meant for us to contract out for trainings regionally based. We have found in COVID a great strength of doing remote trainings. We have better attendance in them. It's a lot easier for people, even if you're doing a regional training. they still have to have some travel time. It's a whole lot easier to just log on your computer and be able to do the training. And just like with the mentoring, Marie has a lot of plans, but we also don't want to dedicate all of those funds to a specific entity right now, but rather just use them as the legislature intended when they gave us those funds. And then the last one is CHSU, and this is the big one. And this one is also where our hands are pretty well tied. They're for grants to new charter schools, and it's through the startup grant. The more charter schools you authorize or are authorized by any authorizer, so this isn't just for state charter school board schools, the funds go there, and that's where the vast majority of our funds lie.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yes.
Is that something that we could potentially task the legislative committee with looking at, maybe tying an amount per charter school approved in the state? Or, I mean, and I understand it's all charter schools, but rather than having a static amount, would it make more sense to tie it to the number, or is that difficult to do legislative fiscal analysis on?
I think it wouldn't hurt to maybe talk to the legislative fiscal analysts. One of the challenges is that we need the money before we know how much we'll need. I would hate to have it where they put it that in the state we can only authorize 1 or 2 schools a year. But the reality is there isn't the same kind of market that there was when maybe this was first done. Another thing to realize, as I said about the CHSA, so the Charter School Startup Administrative Funds, that is dictated on the total amount. So if the total of amount to the startup funds goes down, the amount of money that goes to support schools also goes down, because right now in statute it is tied as a percentage rather than a dollar amount.
Good information. That
is all I have. I am open to any questions. We did present this to the Budget Committee this morning, aka the Authorizing Committee. They do double duty. They didn't seem to have any problems at the time, but they may have additional insights since then.
Okay, thank you for putting this together. I found this very palatable. It was easy to see which bucket the money was coming from and what the purpose was for the spending on it. I also, having been on the State Charter Board for 6-7 years at this point, however long, I am very pleased that we are moving from a reactionary state, because we have been understaffed and it's really difficult to manage over 100 charter schools with a couple of people, to the point where we can be proactive. And everything that I read in the report and everything that you just said supports the evidence to show that we are in good shape moving to be a proactive board, to be able to provide interventions for schools prior to them needing to be closed. And that has been our goal, at least as far as I'm concerned as a board, that we wanted to get to a point where we could intervene soon enough that we didn't have to shut down charter schools, or they didn't get to the point where there was no other option. And so I am very pleased with where we're sitting with this spend plan. Thank you for putting it together. And at this point, I'll open it up to the board for questions or discussion. And then you're looking for a motion to move forward.
I'd like to make a motion.
Yes, go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the SCB carry forward spending plan for 21-22, or?
Like as outlined.
Oh, as outlined,
Okay, we have.
I'm going to be I'll be working on my motions, sitting next to Member Phillips over the next couple meetings.
Okay, we have a motion by Member Spiker. Do we have a second to the motion? We have Member Smith. That's all you do. That's why we need you on the board. Somebody needs to second the motions. Okay, any discussion to the motion?
For the review with NASCA, do you have a time frame of when that might happen? Just so we can expect that as a board?
It needs to, according to our bylaws, be in the year 2022, because that's an even number year. What I would do next is I would work with procurement on how that would work, if it's got to go out for RFP, or if we can do sole source, or we will go through the right way. So it may be that we can't use NACSA, maybe there's a better organization if it goes through RFP, but what we would then do is we would talk with them. I know from looking out there that NACSA does a really good job, and I don't know if there's anyone that can do what they can do, but we would reach out to them and we would get a timeline and just what that would entail, the specifics of it. Yeah, that's probably the best. We did get like preliminary when we were looking at it a couple of years ago, but we'd probably need to redo that.
Great question. Other discussion, Member Phillips?
Just one comment. I really think it sends a strong message to schools and demonstrates to our schools that we authorize that we understand the value of a self-review and an outside review in improving our systems and improving our policies and in fact, in every aspect of what we do as a board. And because that's what we put them through for the same reasons. And the fact that we're embracing that and wholeheartedly want to improve what we do is, I just think, a very strong message to send to our schools.
That's a very excellent point, Member Phillips. Any additional discussion? I will just add to that when we looked at the review process that they provided previously and met with them, that it was impressive, the amount of information that they asked for and received, and how they compiled it and how they presented it. And you know, I'm a big fan of evaluation, and so it really rang my chimes during that meeting. So. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion to the motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, we will move on now to reviewing our board policies. And are you so excited about this? It's the best. Yes, I'm going to have Director Lambert guide us through this process. And if you can all pull up on your devices or look in your binders on tab 5, let's go through these policies together. It goes to what Member Phillips just said. It's good for boards to review their policies to make sure that in practice they're doing what their policies say they're doing. So I think that there's a nice articulation that happens in alignment during this process, and we'll have Director Lambert walk us through these.
Thank you. I could put it up so everyone can see it, but I figured you have the copies. It might just be easier and you'd have to wait for me to get it up posted. Is that okay? You can just look at it separately. Let's start with the new school applications policy. This one, staff doesn't see anything that we think needs to be changed. Let me tell you a little bit of a background to this that some of you may not be aware of. We had a school proposal that came to us a few years ago. The proposal was accepted to move on to the application stage. During that time, the board that submitted the proposal all decided that they no longer wanted to do the new school, and instead they wanted to work with an existing school and maybe do a satellite and be in that area. But the individual who was listed on the proposal documentation was who was going to be the director of the school, and that individual found a new board and then submitted an application. Well, the prior board said, wait a minute, we were the board that you approved. And so the question came, how do we handle this? Who submits, who owns the proposal? When do we consider it a different proposal, like how much change has to happen? And so that is the genesis of this policy.
Very good. Are there any questions on this specific policy? Yeah, Member Phillips.
And we're talking about the new school applications policy. We're going in order, right?
Correct.
Okay. I would just have two suggestions, and they may not be, I don't think I remembered the context of the policy, but these suggestions may still be appropriate. I would just suggest, as a matter of kind of housekeeping, that the application instructions be highlighted and linked to the actual application instructions in the policy that's listed. And then I wonder if we might not add, because we do reference according to timelines and procedures in number 1, I wonder if it might not be appropriate to have something as a number 5 point, since I'm thinking about how we have actually, what actions we've taken in the last 2 years toward new applicants and their applications. Something like the board may choose to move applicants through the regular timeline set forth in the charter school application instructions or on a modified schedule for reasons it deems sufficient. Because I think I like having people know up front that we aren't always necessarily going to follow just the specific application timelines and procedures. We've allowed people to bypass certain steps because we've deemed that we like what we are hearing, but not quite well enough to proceed. But we wanted to keep them engaged in the process and some other things. And I don't want it to limit us as to when we do that, which is why I like what the board deems sufficient. Something like that to add to this policy, but definitely a link to application instructions so it's easy for people to navigate. Those would be my suggestions on this policy.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion to that? I have a question, actually. Member Phillips, do you feel like number 2 covers what you're saying, that applications are considered moved through the process by vote of the board? That's not time-bound. It's probably not as transparent as you're going for, though.
Right, and because number 1 already does talk about timelines and procedures that are set forth in the application instructions, I think giving us stating transparently that we may choose not to actually go according to the timelines and procedures set forth in those instructions is important for transparency. Yeah.
Director Lambert and then Member Smith.
I don't want to go in front of a board member, but I just was wondering for clarification, could we maybe just add to 1 instead of doing a whole new 5? Just, making, unless dictated otherwise by the board, or you're good with language and can come up with something better, but that's just something I was wondering.
I think, if I may share, I think we could say according to timelines and procedures set forth in the charter school application instructions where, then that part is linked, or on a modified schedule for reasons it's deemed sufficient. We could actually just put that phrase in there. And I could send that phrase, but it's just a short phrase that I think lets people, I think we've found a good way at times to adjust the timelines and procedures. And we haven't used it a lot. I think we've done it maybe twice. But I think that it's great when we've found something that's actually efficacious to make sure that we've noted it in our policy and that people have advance notice that we may act in a way different from just the application instructions and their timelines. The link, I think anytime I've greatly appreciated in Utah State Board of Education rule when there are links to the statute and when there are links to a form. I mean, those things I can honestly say in just practicing being an administrator in a charter school have saved my life when I was doing that work. And have also been transparent and clear. And I think that those are just best practices. And, you know, if you see that new school application policy and you're thinking about chartering or seeking a charter, and you can just click on that link in that policy, I think that's just very helpful.
Okay, thank you. Member Smith?
So I'm sure that Vice Chair Bowles and Member Olson will laugh when I say this because we discussed it this morning. But I'm really concerned if we, and I agree, I love having flexibility and I love that we've given ourselves the ability to modify a timeline. What I really don't want to see is this phrased in a way that a school could interpret that as saying, well, you can give me permission to miss a deadline. I really feel like adherence to deadlines is important. So if I'd like to see us have the ability to shorten a timeline, but I would like us to be less flexible when it comes to seeing things submitted in a timely fashion, because to me, especially, that is a key marker of whether a school is functional, right? If you can get things in on time, that's functional. If you can't get things in on time, that's a big problem, right? And so I don't want us to have things in our policy that make it look like we're going to be flexible on that.
That is a very good point. Let me have Director Lambert read what she wrote down. Let's see if it addresses the concern, and then Member Olson will come back to you.
I just added a few extra words on yours. So at the end, it would say, or on a modified schedule deemed sufficient by vote of the board. And that's why I immediately, when you were saying I wanted to add by vote of the board, I don't want it to, you aren't directing that staff can do exactly what Member Smith is talking about, that, oh, they turned it in late, so that's okay. We're talking about votes of the board to change the schedule, like allowing someone to skip the proposal stage the next year.
I like that. I would want someone who has more legal expertise than me to take a look and say, does this create reasonable wiggle room in an applicant's mind to say, well, they could extend this timeline if they wanted, right?
Can you read my handwriting?
Member Olson?
Thanks. I obviously don't have the time and experience on this board of having experienced some occasions where there have been needs for, there's been a need for exceptions to be made. But I guess I would express this concern, similar to what Member Smith has mentioned. As a board, as with any board, we have the power, we have the authority to make exceptions from time to time to our policies if there are extenuating circumstances. We have the ability to say, in a particular instance, on this occasion, there's some extenuating circumstances, and we see a need to deviate from our policy or to find an exception. I think that's fine and that's fair and that's reasonable. Boards have the power to do that. But if you publish in your policy that we are open to exceptions, then you're inviting people to come to you, as Member Smith alluded to, and say, I notice you've got this in your policy, this exception, this open door. It's open maybe just a little crack, but I'm going to try to blow it wide open, and we're going to be inundated with requests to make exceptions to our policy. So I would urge us to be really careful about opening those doors expressly in our policies, because I just think it's a slippery slope that it puts us on. And I think there's safety in just having the policies, making them clear, making them firm, but knowing we have the power in those limited circumstances to make a change or an adjustment on a case-by-case basis without having to say so in the policy. That's my thought.
Thank you for that, Member Olson. AAG Jones, let's.
In response to Member Smith's, the wording now in the policy is that the board would receive proposals and applications according to timelines and procedures that are set forth in the application instructions. And then if you added a phrase, or on a modified schedule that's deemed sufficient by vote of the board, if an applicant was required to have it done by October 1st, they'd have to have it done by October 1st, unless they came to the board and said, can we have an extension? Can we modify our schedule? Could you vote on it? And that type of thing. So I don't know that it gives them a wiggle room to get out of the October 1st date that's listed on their application, but.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I feel better about that, but I generally fall into Member Olson's camp saying, leave it tight the way it is, and know that we have the power to make exceptions if we wish later.
Yeah, if you set a date on an application, that's the date.
Member Phillips?
Well, and I tend to agree with what's been said because that's actually not the conditions, the circumstances under which I was proposing the new language. I never conceived of it actually being in line number 1 or being related to the application deadline, the receipt of the application, the deadline for that. We have in the past, a couple times, allowed someone to forego the initial application process because we had already received their application and allowed them to go directly to the second step the following year. And that's why I felt like it might be appropriate if that's a way that we feel empowered to act, to transparently put that in a 5th point that has nothing to do actually with the date of the receipt of the application. So but having heard what Member Olson said, I'm comfortable as a board more or less doing what we want when we have the support of our members with regard to that and just set the precedent through our actions, especially if it lacks clarity in terms of the other deadlines, because that was never my intent. I absolutely agree with Member Smith in that one of the big red flags of any application process is if the governing board, however young and inexperienced, when I say young, I mean in the field of charter schools, can't get an application in on time. That bodes very ill for future deadlines for state compliance and so on. But I do want our board to have the power, and it may be more transparent to suggest that we in fact do have the power to modify the steps of the process if we have reason that we deem sufficient. But again, I'm comfortable leaving that as it is and just suggesting then the application instructions be linked directly to this policy to improve it.
Vice Chair Bowles?
Just something to think about. We actually haven't, when we've allowed them to skip that first step the following year, we haven't skipped any of the steps of the process. They have gone through all of those steps of the process. We've just asked them to pick up at a different point the following year, even though they've met those steps a year prior. They're still having to meet all of the steps, which seems consistent and fair to me with everyone equally. It just says, we see promise, but you've now gone through this step. We're not going to approve it now. You don't need to repeat that step in the second year. We would like you to repeat the second portion. And so I think we're covered in the policy as it is.
Thank you. And I'm going to resurrect what I said before, that applications are considered and moved through the process by vote of the board. Number 2, in my mind, that covers it. We do have the ability to push the pause button and move things around a little bit. Other discussion to them? We have a motion, right? No. Okay. Lost my place here.
I'll make a motion if you're ready.
Yes, go ahead, Member Smith.
I move to adopt the Utah State Charter School Board New School Application Policy with the addition of a hyperlink inserted to the application instructions.
Okay, and we have a second by Member Phillips. This is such a role switch.
I know.
Okay, any discussion to the motion? All right, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. That was a great discussion. Let's move on to the all other applications.
So this is the next one down, or the next one on your page. This refers to, as it says, satellite replication, expansion, and amendment application. One thing to note is that we no longer really distinguish between satellite and replication, so you may want to clean up some of that language. This is, I don't have a story on this one, so, but this one does, it takes, that first one kind of talks about the new school process. This is the other applications process.
Go ahead, Member Smith.
I would just like to repeat for the board's benefit what you told us this morning in our meeting, which was that as a practical matter, this process, well, it's good to have it as an option available to us, and so it's certainly worth having a policy. It has never been used, right?
Actually,
It's never
you're
been-
one ahead of me.
Oh, I'm sorry then. Oh, fast track. I'm sorry, you're right, I am. Never mind, just kidding.
Wait,
Sorry. I
yeah, so, but you're right.
rescind everything I said.
You're right.
Okay.
Okay, other discussion? Go ahead, Member Smith, and then Vice Chair Bowles, or sorry, Member Phillips.
I just would ask that if we keep this policy, that we would link, once again, the application process instructions with a hyperlink, and that they're on 2A, that where it says applications must be submitted on the correct and most current form, that form be linked to this document so that it's easy for people to access.
Just to clarifying, so the form is updated every year. And so rather than linking to the exact document, would it be within your design that we link to the page that keeps all of those forms there? And that way, we don't have to update it every single time.
I would say yes, but I will say that typically it links directly to the form, even though it is updated every year. I'm thinking of all of our schools who have medication application forms that are linked, or the school's fee schedule that's linked, and so on, and those are updated. Our schools have forms that are updated, probably 50 each and every year, and so I would personally prefer that it just be linked right to the form that they need.
We will do the best that we will have to look into that to see. I'm not sure, just knowing how we're linking the documents, if that's the ability that we have right now. I'll do what we can, if that's okay.
Okay, Vice Chair Bowles?
So I was just verifying that the recommendation is that we strike in line 1 the word replication. Is that right, accurate? So may I make a motion that we pass this policy as is with the, as we strike the word replication in line 1 and add a link to a page that will allow individuals considering an application to link, use a hyperlink to find that application more easily.
Okay, we have a motion by Vice Chair Bowles. Do we have a second? Second by Member Spiker. Oh, boy, you guys are really mixing it up over there. Okay, discussion to the motion. Member Phillips?
I just wonder if Vice Chair Bowles is open to also a hyperlink to the application process instructions as in the previous one.
The suggestion, what I'm just writing on all of these is just hyperlinks where we can. So where staff can ever identify that there's a hyperlink, we'll add that.
Okay, so we have a motion by Vice Chair Bowles and a second by Member Spiker. Further discussion to the motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Terrific. Item number 3, policy number 3, optional fast track replication and satellite application process.
So Member Smith, she's already described this for you. This is something that we created and adopted a few years ago with the intent to be able to allow our high-performing schools an option that's kind of outside our very regimented process for satellite and replications. As a note, I would recommend you consider, removing replication wherever it is listed here, including in the title. We also, even though it's never been used, because there's a small window in which a school could use that flexibility. So even unless we were to get a waiver from the Board of Education, it still would have to be approved prior to October 1st to be able to meet board rule. And that's in that third bullet point there in R27752-552-2. The other point is all but one satellite in recent years has actually had to delay their opening. And so what we're finding is that it's just hard. Building's hard, getting started is hard, getting the market. Actually, I amend that, 2 schools. There were 2 schools that have been able to open on time in recent memory. But many of our satellites, they actually need longer time, not shorter. And that's what this facilitates. However, you may still want to be able to have it because if say building changes and you can all of a sudden get construction to happen and lumber doesn't cost the amount of gold, you know, there may be schools that can do this. Another recommendation from staff is when we did this first, we didn't have the designation of high standing. And so we were trying to maybe make that here. You may want to consider aligning that to now that we do have a high standing rather than have a separate thing for this. Maybe just align that. That would be for your consideration.
Okay, thank you. Member Smith and then Member Phillips.
I'm ready to make a motion if we can discuss after, or do you want to discuss first? Okay.
Okay,
I would
let's
like
go
to
for the
move to
motion.
approve the Utah State Charter School Board optional fast track satellite application process, strike replication. I would like to direct that we insert the addition of hyperlinks wherever possible into this document, and that we adopt the language for high-performing schools that is, what did you say, standardized from designated high-performance schools? High standing.
High standing, yes.
If I can maybe just add, you may want to at least see this again, even on consent, because you are talking about, you know, maybe a more significant change. It may be worth the board's effort to maybe just see it again. Like staff will draft up what you're talking about of how that language for high standing may look, and then for you to then approve it on consent next month if, unless you just want us to go forward.
So you can just add and
Add
bring
it.
it back on consent.
And add to consent, yeah.
Okay, we have a motion on the table. Do we have a second? Okay, Member Bassett seconded. And discussion to the motion. Go ahead, Member Phillips.
I think that's a great motion, and I support it. I just wanted, as I was reading this, I saw the reference to performance criteria published on the SCSB website, and I'm certain that this is user error on my part, but I searched for it and could not find it. So I'm wondering if it could be even more prominent or hyperlinked as well for people like me.
Just for your information, that would be another way for us to describe CSAF, the Charter School Accountability Framework. But you are correct, someone who's not staff that lives and breathes this, probably that's not obvious.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Additional discussion to the motion. Dr. Spiker?
I was just going to add too that I think if we want to be mindful about the high-performing schools, just infusing that into this, I think number 3 might already help us with that if the school does not meet the established criteria. If we set that as such based on what we've now said, that just might help us a little bit in terms of having to rewrite this as much. And that also gives us a little bit of flexibility based on, I mean, we don't want to be changing that criteria often, but it doesn't pigeonhole.
Hamstring.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Additional discussion to the motion? Okay, seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, we'll say that that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the last one, the requirement of signed charter document for full approval and prior to release of any public funds. Director Lambert?
So a number of years ago, quite a few years actually, there was a state audit done that found that a charter school that had been approved but did not have a signed charter agreement had been released funds and sent funds without having a charter agreement. And so in answer to that, we actually had already started this policy and changed the practice before the audit came, but we definitely did need this because there were some issues at the time of getting charter agreements signed before funds can be released. This has been a policy that as staff, we have actually pointed to a number of times that it is a good incentive for charter schools to be very mindful of working on that charter agreement in a timely manner because their funds depend on it. And so this, we do recommend that well, if there's any hyperlinks here, we can add those. But in addition, it does have old links to statute. This was done before the recodification, so we would recommend that you make those changes to this.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? Member Phillips?
This is just ticky, because I think that, it doesn't really have lend itself to hyperlinks or anything, but if you'll notice on the first two paragraphs, the font on UCA is just different. That's bugging me. And then if you look under Policy for Charter Agreement Execution for Full Approval, here it should probably read the SCSB's vote. There should probably be a possessive there to approve an application. It could just be left the way it is, but then a little bit further down, under Policy for Charter Agreement Execution for Release of Funds, we do say it is the SCSB's policy. So I'm just asking for those to be consistent one way or the other, either SCS.
Wait.
Sorry, I was trying to figure out where.
Sorry. So under the very last paragraph, Policy for Charter Agreement, we use the SCSB's. So I just would think we would use apostrophe S for both or just the acronym for both. And then if you look at that same first sentence in the last paragraph, there's some messed up stuff. So it is the SCSB's policy that it will not, there's a comma that comes there unexpectedly and in an interruptive way. So that comma needs to be taken out. It is the SCSB's policy that it will not submit to the USBE, and then that comma needs to be taken out as well. Otherwise, you're trying to read it and you don't even know what you're doing. So just, it is the SCSB's policy that it will not submit to the USBE any request for public
Phillips.
funds.
I apologize for
Yes.
interrupting you, but our wonderful Vice Chair Bowles has provided an edited copy to Director Lambert.
Thank you so much. All right, and there are some future problems with commas too. Did you get them in that last paragraph? Okay. Okay, very good. I'll take a look at your sheet after, because I think if we could just tidy up those mechanics, the policy's fine, and it's very needful.
I love that you're doing this. I think this was actually our first policy written, so this one is an old one. Is it okay if maybe, because I'm starting to notice there's actually, at least to my eyes, some weird things that are going on to the font and to the spacing and just some things. Could maybe staff clean it up and then maybe bring it to consent? Is that, and if you can send me anyone's corrections, I would appreciate that, but we'll go over this. I apologize, it's so messy.
Okay. Yeah, Member Phillips.
I have a motion, and it kind of came out of our Oversight Performance Committee discussion.
Is it based on this
No.
policy?
No.
Let's finish this.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay.
Up first. Do we have a motion for this one? Member Smith, go ahead.
I will move to revise and edit this policy, the Utah State Charter School Board requirement of signed charter document for full approval and prior to release of any public funds, that be edited and updated in accordance with our discussion and be placed on consent for our next meeting.
Hey, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Okay, Member Spiker seconded. Discussion to the motion. Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Member Phillips.
I'd like to make a further motion on policies in general, that the board, I move that the board instructs staff to hyperlink any policies we have with appropriate forms and pages and information, and that staff be directed to update any obsolete dates or references to board rule that have been renumbered and the like.
Okay, we have a motion by Member Phillips and a second by Member Smith. Do we have any discussion to the motion? Member Phillips?
Among some of the more obvious reasons that, that I won't go into, we discovered in another policy that there was an April 2019 reference to a different accountability structure. And those sorts of things, we wanted to empower staff to fix for obvious reasons, just as a general standing directive.
Okay, thank you for that additional discussion. Director Lambert?
I really appreciate this, and I think it also shows that I think we would like to maybe put in front of you on a regular basis the policies. That way, we also are making sure that they're updated, but also thinking about them and thinking and making sure that it's a living documents that guides staff in our work and also helps you in your work.
I agree. Thank you for that. We have a motion by Member Phillips and a second by Member Smith. Any additional discussion to the motion? Okay, seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Policy work up to our elbows. I love it. At this point, we will move into a closed session in accordance with the Utah Open and Public Meetings Act for purposes outlined in law. This requires a motion and a voice vote, right? Am I right? Okay, and this will be for the purpose of this closed meeting is to discuss our director's evaluation that we've been working on for the past couple of months. So I'll need a motion and then we'll do a voice vote.
I move that we go into closed session to discuss competence character of an individual.
Okay, does that satisfy? Okay. Yes, so there was a motion by Member Phillips, a second by Member Smith. We'll do a roll call vote, starting with Member Phillips.
Yes.
Smith,
Yes?
Member Spiker,
Yes.
Member Olson,
Yes.
Member Bassett. Yes. And Vice Chair Bowles.
Yes.
Okay, we can move into closed session. We will excuse staff, and we would request that our AAG, David Jones, remain with us.
You are in the meeting now. Recording in progress.
Wait, do we have to move to come out? So, okay,
Don't you have to make a motion to go out?
I thought we had to make, okay.
I've always done that. That's why.
I have two. We are now in open session. I just declared it.
Okay.
Okay. And thank you, everybody, for the great discussion. And now we will look for a motion.
I'd like to make a motion, Chair, if it's all right with you.
Yes, Member Phillips, go right ahead.
I would like to move that the board authorize its executive leadership to seek a bonus for our executive director under the parameters allowed by public processes, and that it be a significant bonus as as determined by the executive officers of the board.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Member Smith? I didn't even wait for you to say it. I just assumed it would be you. All right, we have a motion by Member Phillips, a second by Member Smith. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. I'm looking for one last motion. Member Smith, would you like, or Member Olson, would you like to make it?
About that, I'd love to make my first motion that I move that we adjourn our meeting today.
Okay, no second is even needed. Thank you for being here today.